Hello, friend. Welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, welcome to a place where science meets stillness, where wonder unfolds slowly, and where you're invited to simply rest while your mind wanders through the hidden architecture of being alive. Right now, as you settle into this moment, there are 37 trillion quiet workers inside you. They never clock out. They never take a break. And tonight, while you drift towards sleep, they'll begin the most important shift of their day. A shift you'll never see, a shift you'll never feel, but a shift that keeps you alive, keeps you thinking, keeps you, you. What are your cells doing while you sleep? Everything you forgot to thank them for. Before we drift into this journey together, if you find something peaceful in these quiet explorations, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe if you'd like more stories, told softly in the dark, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. No pressure, just an invitation. Now, let's drift. Tonight we're stepping into a world that exists beneath your awareness, a world of repair, renewal, and silent conversation. The world your cells inhabit when consciousness fades and the body finally gets permission to do what it does best: to heal, to remember, to prepare for tomorrow without you having to ask. You don't need to understand everything, just rest. Let curiosity do the listening. Some nights when sleep feels like surrender, it's easy to think the body is shutting down, powering off, going dark. But that's not what happens at all. The moment you close your eyes, something remarkable begins. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not stillness, but a different kind of motion. Scientists call it the restorative phase, but really it's more like a second life, one that only exists in darkness, one that's been running since before you were born. Your body knows how to sleep better than you know how to wake. It's been practicing for millions of years, long before humans built cities or wrote language or wondered why the stars move. Our cells learn to work in shifts. Day shift, night shift. One to survive the world. One to survive the wear of surviving. And the night shift, some researchers suggest, might be the more important of the two. Think about it. Every breath you take during the day creates a small catastrophe inside you. Oxygen, the very thing that keeps you alive, also damages your DNA. Every meal you eat, every step you take, every thought you think, it all leaves microscopic scars. Proteins misfold. Cellular waste accumulates. Mitochondria. Those ancient little engines inside every cell begin to falter under the weight of constant energy production. By the time evening arrives, your body is a construction site filled with debris. But you don't collapse. You don't degrade. Because your cells have a plan. They've always had a plan. When the sun sets and melatonin begins its slow rise through your bloodstream, a signal goes out. Not a loud one, not a command. Just a whisper that travels from the brain to every corner of your body. A whisper that says, "It's time. Begin the work we cannot do in daylight." And so they do. Quietly, relentlessly, perfectly. Let's start with something you might not expect. Your brain. You'd think the brain would rest during sleep, wouldn't you? That it would go quiet, dim, take a break from the relentless noise of being awake. But research shows the opposite. In some ways, your brain works harder while you sleep than it does while you're awake. It just works differently. During the day, your brain is reactive. It's responding to the world, processing faces, dodging traffic, remembering where you left your keys. It's magnificent, yes, but it's also messy. Every experience, every sensation, every fleeting thought creates a new connection between neurons. Scientists call these connections synapses, and by the end of the day, you have too many of them. Not all memories are worth keeping. Not all connections matter. Your brain knows this. So, while you sleep, it begins a process called synaptic pruning. It's exactly what it sounds like. The brain carefully, methodically cuts away the synapses that don't serve you. The ones formed from trivial moments. The ones that would clutter your mind if they stayed. This isn't deletion. It's curation. Like a gardener trimming a hedge, your brain shapes itself at night. It decides what to keep and what to let go. And here's the beautiful part. It does this without asking your permission. It knows better than you do what you need to remember. In 2003, a neuroscientist named Giulio Tononi proposed something called the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is simple. During waking hours, learning strengthens synapses. They grow, they multiply, they consume energy. But if this continued unchecked, your brain would become overwhelmed. Too many connections, too much noise. So, sleep, Tononi suggested, is the brain's way of restoring balance, weakening the unimportant synapses, strengthening the ones that matter, bringing the system back to baseline. It seems as though the brain doesn't just rest at night. It edits, it refines, it becomes a better version of itself while you dream. And it's not just theory. Studies have shown this again and again. Students who sleep after learning perform better on tests than those who stay awake. Not because sleep is passive rest, but because sleep is active restructuring. The information doesn't just sit there. It gets woven into the architecture of who you are. Have you ever noticed that a problem that seemed impossible at night feels suddenly solvable in the morning? That's not magic. That's your brain working through the night, reorganizing what you know, finding patterns you couldn't see in the daylight. Some believe this is why dreams feel so strange. Because you're witnessing in fragments the brain's midnight labor, memories colliding, ideas rearranging, old images paired with new emotions. It's not random, it's renovation. But here's where it gets even quieter, even stranger. While your neurons are pruning and strengthening and deciding what version of yesterday to keep, something else is happening. Something that wasn't discovered until 2012. Something so important that it might change the way you think about sleep forever. A scientist named Maiken Nedergaard was studying the brains of mice. She noticed something odd. During sleep, the space between brain cells expanded. Not by much, just 10 to 15%. But that tiny expansion created room for something remarkable. Fluid began to flow. Cerebrospinal fluid. The clear liquid that cushions your brain started moving through the brain tissue like a gentle tide, washing away the metabolic waste that had built up during the day. She called it the glymphatic system, a nighttime cleaning crew for the brain. And it only works, research shows, when you're asleep. Think about that. Your brain has a waste disposal system that can only activate in darkness. During the day when you're awake and alert, this system is barely functional. But when you sleep, when your neurons quiet down and your consciousness drifts away, the brain opens its channels and lets the cleaning begin. One of the substances this system clears is called beta amyloid. You might recognize that name. It's the protein that accumulates in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. It clumps together, forming plaques that disrupt memory and thought. But every night, if you sleep well, your brain flushes it away. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Scientists suggest this might be one reason why chronic sleep deprivation is linked to dementia. It's not just that lack of sleep makes you foggy. It's that lack of sleep prevents your brain from taking out the trash. And over years, decades, that trash builds up. Until one day it's too much. So when you sleep, you're not escaping the world. You're not wasting time. You're giving your brain permission to do what it cannot do while you're awake. To clean, to organize, to protect itself from its own activity. And this is just the beginning, just the brain. We haven't even touched the rest of you yet. Your heart is slowing, your breath is deepening. And in the trillions of cells that make up your skin, your muscles, your organs, something ancient is waking up. Not waking in the way you wake, but waking in the way a night-blooming flower wakes, slowly, inevitably, toward a purpose only darkness can fulfill. You're not doing this, you're letting it happen. And maybe that's the hardest thing to learn, that some of the most important work doesn't require effort, it requires release. The body knows, it's always known. From the very first cell that learned to divide in the primordial ocean to the complex miracle you are. Now life has understood that survival requires rhythm, light and dark, work and rest, building and repair. You are not separate from this rhythm, you are made of it. And now, as we drift deeper into this night, let's follow that rhythm into the places most people never think about. Into the machinery of memory itself, where neurons are doing something so precise, so delicate that it can only happen while you dream. While your eyes move beneath closed lids, while your breathing slows into rhythm, something extraordinary is happening in the space between your thoughts. Your memories are being rewritten, not erased, not fabricated, but carefully, deliberately reshaped into something stronger, something more permanent, something that will outlast the moment they were born. This is the work neurons do in darkness, the work of deciding who you'll become. Memory. It turns out is not a recording. It's not a photograph tucked away in some dusty corner of your brain. It's living tissue. And like all living things, it needs care. It needs attention. It needs the quiet hours of night to transform from something fragile into something that lasts. When you experience something during the day, your brain doesn't immediately file it away as a permanent memory. Instead, it creates what scientists call a memory trace, a temporary pattern of neural activity, delicate, unstable, easily disrupted. If you've ever forgotten someone's name 30 seconds after hearing it, you know exactly what this feels like. The trace was there, but it didn't have time to become real. Sleep is what makes it real. In 2005, researchers at Harvard Medical School conducted a simple experiment. They taught students a series of visual patterns and divided them into two groups. One group stayed awake after learning. The other group went to sleep. When tested later, the students who slept performed dramatically better. Not just a little better, dramatically. Their accuracy improved, their speed improved, their confidence improved. And here's what matters. Nothing changed during sleep except sleep itself. No studying, no practice. Just the act of closing their eyes and letting the brain do what it does best. Consolidation. That's the technical term. The process by which temporary memory traces become permanent. During sleep, the hippocampus, that small seahorse-shaped structure, deep in your brain, begins replaying the day's experiences. Not in real time, much faster, in brief, compressed bursts of neural activity. Scientists suggest these bursts allow the hippocampus to communicate with the cortex, the outer layer of the brain where long-term memories are stored. It's as if the hippocampus is whispering to the cortex, saying, "Remember this, we'll need it later." And the cortex listens. Slowly, carefully, it weaves those experiences into the fabric of everything you already know. It connects new information to old information. It finds patterns. It builds understanding, not all at once, but across multiple nights, multiple cycles of sleep, the process continues until the memory is no longer something you try to recall. It's something you simply know. But not all memories are treated equally. Your brain is selective, ruthlessly so, and this is where sleep reveals something almost poetic about how we're designed. The memories that matter most, the ones tied to emotion, to meaning, to survival, those are the ones your brain chooses to strengthen. Research shows that emotional memories consolidate more robustly during sleep than neutral ones. If something made you laugh, made you cry, made you feel alive, your brain will work harder to preserve it. Not because it's trying to make you happy or sad, but because emotion is the brain's way of marking importance. Emotion says, "This matters. Don't forget this." And so, you don't. Even decades later, you can remember where you were when something profound happened. The details might blur. The chronology might shift, but the core of it stays. Because your brain decided in the darkness of 1,000 forgotten nights that this was worth keeping. There's a researcher named Matthew Walker, a neuroscientist at UC Berkeley who has spent years studying sleep and memory. He describes sleep as an email system for the brain. During the day, memories arrive in your inbox, the hippocampus. But the inbox has limited space. If you don't sleep, new memories have nowhere to go. The inbox fills up. Learning becomes harder, eventually impossible. But when you sleep, the brain transfers those memories from the inbox to long-term storage, the cortex. The inbox clears, and when you wake up, there's room again. Room for new experiences, room for new learning, room for life to continue teaching you things. Have you ever noticed that children who are learning at an astonishing rate sleep more than adults? That's not coincidence, that's necessity. Their brains are processing more new information every single day, building language, understanding physics through play, learning how faces express emotion. It's exhausting, this kind of growth, and it requires more time in the dark, more time for the brain to organize what it's absorbed. But here's where the story deepens. Memory consolidation isn't just about strengthening what you learned. It's also about integration, about taking isolated pieces of information and connecting them in ways you never consciously considered. There's a famous story, though. It might be apocryphal, about a chemist named Auguste Kekulé. In 1865, he was struggling to understand the structure of benzene, a molecule that seemed to defy the rules of chemistry. He worked for months. Nothing made sense. Then one night he fell asleep in front of his fireplace and dreamed of a snake biting its own tail, forming a ring. When he woke, he realized benzene wasn't a chain. It was a ring, a circular structure. The dream didn't give him new information. It gave him a new way of seeing the information he already had. Scientists suggest this kind of insight, this sudden reorganization of knowledge, happens because sleep allows the brain to explore connections without the constraints of waking logic. During REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreams occur, the brain's activity becomes chaotic, unfiltered, free. Distant ideas collide. Unrelated memories merge. And sometimes in that collision, something new emerges. Not always, not reliably, but often enough that we've learned to trust it, to sleep on a problem, to wait for the answer to arrive in the morning unbidden. But what about the memories you wish you could forget? The ones that hurt, the ones that replay in your mind when you'd rather they didn't. Does sleep strengthen those too? It does, but not in the way you might fear. Research shows that sleep doesn't just preserve the emotional intensity of a memory. It can also soften it, strip away some of the sharp edges. This happens during REM sleep, when the brain replays emotional experiences, but in the absence of stress hormones like noradrenaline. It seems as though the brain is re-experiencing the memory in a safer context, allowing you to integrate it without being overwhelmed by it. Some believe this is why, after a terrible day's sleep, can make the pain feel just a little more bearable, not gone, but softer, more distant. Of course, this process can fail. In people with post-traumatic stress disorder, the normal softening doesn't occur. The memories remain raw, intrusive, unbearable. Scientists are still trying to understand why, but the fact that sleep usually helps, that it usually heals, tells us something important. That forgetting isn't the opposite of remembering. That sometimes the kindest thing the brain can do is not erase the past, but change your relationship to it. And then there's the library metaphor. It's been used before, but it bears repeating. Imagine your brain as a vast library. During the day, books are being pulled from the shelves constantly, read, annotated, left open on tables. By evening, the library is in chaos, books everywhere, no order, no system. But when the library closes, when the patrons leave and the lights dim, the librarians emerge. They don't throw books away. They don't rewrite them. They simply return them to their proper places. They reorganize. They repair damaged spines. They catalog new arrivals. And when morning comes, when the library opens again, everything is where it should be, ready to be found when needed. That's what your neurons are doing right now, quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. They're organizing the chaos of your waking life into something coherent, something usable, something that will help you navigate the world when the sun rises. But this work isn't instantaneous. It doesn't happen in one night. Some memories take weeks to fully consolidate. Some take months. And some, the deepest ones, the ones that define you, those are strengthened and refined across years of sleep. Thousands of nights, thousands of opportunities for your brain to say, yes, this is who you are, this is what you know, this is worth keeping. So, when you feel guilty about sleeping, when you think of it as lost time, remember this. Your memories are not formed in the light. They are formed in the dark. Every lesson you've ever learned, every skill you've ever mastered, every person you've ever loved, they are all preserved, protected, and woven into the person you are because you slept. Because you gave your brain the time it needed to do its work, and that work never stops. Even now, as you listen to these words, your brain is already marking some of them as important, already preparing to consolidate them later when you finally drift off. Not all of them, just the ones that resonated, the ones that meant something. And by morning, they won't feel like something you heard. They'll feel like something you know. But memory is only part of the story, because while your neurons are busy rewriting the past, other cells are doing something just as essential. They're repairing the present, cleaning up the damage that daylight leaves behind. And if memory is the brain's way of deciding who you are, then repair is the body's way of ensuring you get to keep being that person for as long as possible. Every cell in your body is damaged right now, this very moment, thousands of times over. It's not dramatic, it's not dangerous, it's just the cost of being alive. And if nothing fixed it, you wouldn't last a week. But something does fix it, every single night. While you dream of faces and falling and places that don't exist, your cells are doing the most meticulous repair work in the known universe. Work so precise, so essential, that without it, you would simply cease to be. This is the night shift you never think about, the one that keeps you from dissolving into chaos. Your DNA, that elegant double helix twisted inside every cell, is under constant assault. Ultraviolet light from the sun damages it. Oxygen, the molecule you breathe to stay alive, creates reactive compounds that attack it. Even the normal process of cell division introduces errors, tiny mutations, broken strands, mismatched base pairs. By the end of a single day, each cell in your body has accumulated thousands of these little catastrophes, thousands of moments where the genetic code that defines you has been corrupted even slightly. And yet, you don't fall apart. You don't mutate into something unrecognizable because your cells have repair mechanisms, ancient, elegant systems that have been protecting life for billions of years. And many of these systems work best, research shows, when you're asleep. Think about it. During the day, your cells are busy. They're dividing. They're producing proteins. They're responding to signals from other cells. They're keeping you alive in real time. There's barely a moment to stop and assess the damage. But when you sleep, when the demands of waking life quiet down, your cells can finally focus on maintenance, on making sure the machinery that keeps you alive doesn't degrade beyond repair. One of the most important repair systems is called nucleotide excision repair. It's a mouthful, but the concept is simple. Specialized proteins patrol your DNA looking for damage. When they find it, they cut out the damaged section, synthesize a new piece of DNA to replace it, and stitch everything back together perfectly, as if nothing was ever wrong. This process happens constantly, but scientists suggest it ramps up during sleep when cells have more resources available for repair rather than for activity. There's a genetic condition called xeroderma pigmentosum, mercifully rare, where this repair system doesn't work properly. People with this condition are extraordinarily sensitive to sunlight. Even brief exposure causes severe DNA damage that their cells cannot fix. They develop skin cancers at a young age. They must live essentially in darkness. It's a tragic reminder of what happens when repair fails, of how much we depend on these invisible systems, working silently, flawlessly, night after night. But DNA repair is only the beginning, is only the There's another process, one that won a Nobel Prize in 2016, that might be even more important. It's called autophagy, and it's one of the strangest, most beautiful things your cells do. Autophagy literally means self-eating, and that's exactly what it is. Your cells eat parts of themselves, not out of desperation, not as a last resort, but as a deliberate, organized cleaning process. Like a city sending garbage trucks through every neighborhood, your cells send specialized structures called autophagosomes through the cytoplasm, collecting damaged proteins, broken organelles, and cellular debris. These autophagosomes then fuse with lysosomes, tiny sacs filled with digestive enzymes, and everything inside is broken down into basic components, recycled, turned into raw materials that can be used to build new functional structures. The scientist who figured this out, Yoshinori Otsumi, spent decades studying yeast cells under a microscope. He was trying to understand how cells survive starvation. What he discovered was that cells don't just passively wait to die when nutrients run out. They actively dismantle their own non-essential parts to stay alive. They sacrifice the unnecessary to preserve the vital. And this same process, it turns out, happens in every cell in your body. Not just during starvation, but all the time, especially during sleep. Some researchers believe autophagy is one reason why intermittent fasting has health benefits. Not because going without food is inherently good, but because when cells sense nutrient scarcity, they ramp up their cleaning processes. They become more efficient at removing junk. But you don't need to fast to trigger autophagy. Sleep does it naturally. When you sleep, your cells enter a state where they can focus on quality control rather than constant production. And here's the connection that matters when autophagy fails. When cells lose the ability to clean themselves, they accumulate damage. Misfolded proteins pile up. Dysfunctional mitochondria linger. And over time, this accumulation is linked to aging, to neurodegeneration, to diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. It seems as though the difference between a cell that ages gracefully and one that doesn't might come down to how well it takes out its own trash. This is why chronic sleep deprivation is so insidious. It's not just that you feel tired, it's that your cells are being denied the time they need to clean themselves. Day after day, the damage accumulates, the junk builds up, and eventually the machinery starts to fail. There was a study at UC Berkeley published in 2013 that followed people who slept less than 6 hours a night. The researchers found that even short-term sleep deprivation altered the expression of hundreds of genes related to inflammation, immune function, and stress response. The cells weren't just tired, they were distressed, operating in a kind of emergency mode. And when that mode becomes chronic, when it lasts for years, the consequences are profound. Higher rates of cancer, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher rates of cognitive decline. But the reverse is also true. When you prioritize sleep, when you give your cells the time they need, the benefits ripple through every system in your body. Your immune cells work better. Your heart cells repair more efficiently. Your neurons clear away toxic proteins before they can clump into plaques. It's not magic, it's just biology doing what it was designed to do given the right conditions. Now, let's talk about something you probably take for granted: protein folding. Every cell in your body produces thousands of proteins every day. These proteins are made as long chains of amino acids, but a chain isn't useful on its own. It has to fold into a specific three-dimensional shape to function, and the shape matters enormously. A protein folded correctly can catalyze reactions, transport molecules, send signals. A protein folded incorrectly is worse than useless, it's dangerous. Misfolded proteins can clump together, forming aggregates that interfere with cellular function. In the brain, these aggregates are linked to diseases like Alzheimer's, where beta amyloid proteins misfold and form plaques, and Parkinson's, where alpha-synuclein misfolds and damages neurons. In other tissues, misfolded proteins contribute to conditions like type 2 diabetes, and certain heart diseases. So how do cells prevent this? They use something called chaperone proteins. These molecular helpers guide newly made proteins into their correct shapes and refold proteins that have gone astray. And guess when chaperone proteins are most active during sleep? When the cell isn't overwhelmed with other tasks. When it can dedicate resources to quality control. Think of chaperone proteins as the meticulous editors of the cellular world. They don't write the story, the genes do that, but they make sure the story is told correctly. They catch the errors, they fix the typos, they ensure that every protein functions the way it's supposed to. And when they can't fix a protein, when the damage is too severe, they mark it for destruction. Better to lose one protein than to let it poison the whole system. There's something almost tender about this, isn't there? The way your cells care for themselves, the way they distinguish between what can be saved and what must be discarded, the way they work hour after hour to maintain order in a universe that tends toward chaos. But cells aren't just repairing themselves in isolation. They're also repairing the structures they live in, the membranes that hold them together, the extracellular matrix that gives tissues their shape and strength, even the tiny powerhouses called mitochondria, those ancient bacteria that merged with our ancestors a billion years ago and now produce the energy that keeps us alive. Mitochondria are particularly interesting. They have their own DNA separate from the DNA in your cell's nucleus. And that DNA is even more vulnerable to damage because it lives right where energy production happens, right where reactive oxygen species are constantly being generated. It's like working in a factory with sparks flying everywhere. Dangerous, damaging, inevitable. But mitochondria have their own repair systems. And research shows these systems are more active during sleep. When energy demand is lower, mitochondria can focus on fixing themselves rather than constantly churning out ATP, the molecule that fuels every cellular process. Some scientists suggest this is one reason why poor sleep is linked to metabolic disorders, because damaged mitochondria can't produce energy efficiently. And when your cells can't produce energy efficiently, everything else starts to fail. Have you ever wondered why you feel physically restored after a good night's sleep? It's not just psychological. It's not just that you feel rested. It's that your cells actually are restored. The damage of yesterday has been repaired. The debris has been cleared. The machinery has been serviced. You are in a very real sense a slightly newer version of yourself. And here's the beautiful paradox. This renewal happens through destruction. Through the dismantling of damaged parts, through the sacrifice of the broken, so the whole can continue. It's creative destruction at the cellular level. The same principle that drives evolution, drives ecosystems, drives the cycle of life itself. Death in service of life. Endings in service of continuity. Some people think of aging as entropy as the inevitable slide toward disorder. And there's truth in that. But aging is also the result of accumulated repair failures. Nights when the cleaning didn't happen. Nights when the damage outpaced the fixing. Nights that were traded for something that seemed more important in the moment, but cost more than we realized. This isn't meant to make you anxious. It's meant to make you grateful for the trillions of cells inside you that never complain, never ask for recognition, never stop trying to keep you whole. They don't need your conscious help. They just need time, darkness, permission to do what they've been doing since the first cell split into two and decided that life was worth preserving. So when you sleep tonight, know that you're not just resting. You're participating in a process that's been refined over billions of years, a process that takes the wreckage of the day and turns it back into something that can face the next day. A process that proves over and over that repair is possible. That damage doesn't have to be permanent, that given the right conditions, living things can heal themselves. But cells don't work alone. They work in concert with chemical messengers, with hormones that rise and fall in precise rhythms, orchestrating the body's night shift with a precision that rivals any symphony. And it's to those messengers, those invisible conductors of the cellular night, that we turn our attention next. Your body speaks in chemicals, not words, not thoughts, but molecules that travel through blood and tissue carrying messages that tell every cell what to do and when to do it. And at night, when the world goes dark, these chemical messengers perform a symphony so precise, so perfectly timed, that even a small disruption can throw everything into discord. This is the language your body uses when you're not listening, the conversation that happens while you dream. Hormones are often misunderstood. People think of them as simple on-off switches. You have too much of this, not enough of that. But the truth is far more elegant. Hormones are rhythms. They rise and fall in waves and patterns that repeat every 24 hours, synchronized to the rotation of the Earth itself. And sleep is when these rhythms matter most, when the timing has to be perfect, when being even an hour off can mean the difference between health and disease. Let's start with the most famous sleep hormone, melatonin. You've probably heard of it. Maybe you've even taken it as a supplement. But do you know what it actually does? Not just makes you sleepy, though that's part of it. Melatonin is a signal, a chemical announcement that darkness has arrived and the body can begin its nighttime protocols. Melatonin was discovered in 1958 by a dermatologist named Aaron Lerner. He wasn't looking for a sleep hormone. He was studying pigment cells in amphibians, trying to understand what made their skin change color. He extracted a substance from cow pineal glands, thousands of them, and found that this substance could lighten the skin of tadpoles. He called it melatonin, from the Greek words for black and skin. He had no idea at the time that he'd found one of the most important biological timekeepers in the animal kingdom. It took decades to understand what melatonin really does, not in tadpoles but in humans. Research shows that as evening approaches, as light fades from the sky, your eyes send signals to a tiny cluster of neurons in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This cluster acts as your master clock, your internal timekeeper. And when it receives the signal that darkness has fallen, it sends a message to the pineal gland, a pine cone-shaped structure deep in your brain, telling it to start producing melatonin. The melatonin then floods into your bloodstream. Within an hour or two, its concentration rises dramatically. And as it circulates through your body, it doesn't just make you drowsy, it changes the behavior of nearly every cell. It tells your metabolism to slow down. It tells your core body temperature to drop. It tells your immune system to ramp up certain functions and dial back others. It orchestrates the shift from day mode to night mode, from activity to restoration. But here's what most people don't realize. Artificial light disrupts this process completely. The blue wavelengths emitted by screens, by LED bulbs, by the modern world we've built, they trick your brain into thinking it's still daytime. The suprachiasmatic nucleus delays the signal to produce melatonin. The surge happens later or not at all. And without that surge, the entire symphony falls out of rhythm. You lie awake wondering why sleep won't come, not realizing that you've been jamming the signal your body needs to initiate the night shift. Some researchers suggest this is one reason why rates of insomnia have skyrocketed in the past few decades. Not because humans have fundamentally changed, but because we've created an environment that our biology wasn't designed for. We've extended the day artificially, and our cells, ancient things that still expect the rhythm of sunrise and sunset, don't know how to adapt. But melatonin is just the opening note. The real symphony involves dozens of hormones, each with its own role, its own timing, its own contribution to the restoration of your body. Consider growth hormone. During the day, its levels are relatively low. Your body is busy managing immediate demands, responding to stress, digesting food, moving through space. But when you fall into deep sleep, specifically during the slow wave sleep that dominates the first half of the night, growth hormone surges. Not a gradual increase, a spike, a sudden dramatic release from the pituitary gland. This hormone doesn't just make children grow taller, though it does that too. In adults, growth hormone is essential for tissue repair. It stimulates the production of new proteins, It helps muscles recover from the micro tears that occur during exercise. It strengthens bones. It maintains the integrity of organs. Some scientists believe the growth hormone surge during sleep is one reason why athletes who sleep well perform better and recover faster than those who don't. The hormone is literally rebuilding them while they rest. There's a study that followed college basketball players over several weeks. The researchers tracked their sleep and their performance. What they found was striking. When players slept 10 hours a night instead of their usual 6 or 7. Their sprint times improved. Their shooting accuracy improved. Their reaction times improved. Not because they practiced more, not because they trained harder, but because their bodies had time to produce the growth hormone they needed to repair and strengthen. And yet so many people treat sleep like a luxury, like something you can skip when there's work to be done. What they don't realize is that skipping sleep means skipping repair. It means asking your body to perform without giving it the resources to maintain itself. Eventually that debt comes due. Now let's talk about cortisol. You've probably heard it called the stress hormone, and that's accurate but incomplete. Cortisol isn't inherently bad, it's essential. It mobilizes energy, it sharpens focus, it helps you respond to challenges. The problem isn't cortisol itself, it's cortisol at the wrong time. In a healthy person, cortisol follows a clear pattern. It's lowest in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. Then, a few hours before you wake up, it begins to rise. By the time your alarm goes off, your cortisol levels have surged, preparing you for the demands of the day. This is called the cortisol awakening response, and it's one of the most reliable rhythms in human biology. But when you don't sleep well, this rhythm breaks down. Cortisol stays elevated at night when it should be low, or it doesn't rise properly in the morning when it should be high. And when cortisol loses its rhythm, everything else starts to falter. Your immune system becomes dysregulated. Your metabolism becomes less efficient. Your mood becomes unstable. Chronic stress, the kind where cortisol is always elevated, is linked to nearly every major disease: heart disease, diabetes, depression, autoimmune disorders. Sleep is the body's way of resetting cortisol, of bringing it back to baseline so it can rise again the next day with purpose. Without that reset, you're running on a stress response that never ends, and no organism can sustain that indefinitely. There's another hormone that deserves attention: prolactin. Most people associate prolactin with lactation, with the production of milk in nursing mothers, and that's one of its roles. But prolactin does something else, something that happens in everyone, regardless of gender or reproductive status. During sleep, prolactin levels rise steadily. They peak in the early morning hours and remain elevated until you wake. Research shows that prolactin plays a role in immune function. It helps regulate the activity of white blood cells, the soldiers of your immune system. It enhances the production of certain antibodies. Some scientists suggest that the rise in prolactin during sleep is one reason why your body can fight off infections more effectively when you're well rested. It's not just that sleep gives your immune cells time to work. It's that sleep triggers the hormones that make those cells work better. There's a particularly elegant study from the 1990s that illustrated this. Researchers gave people a vaccine and then tracked their immune response. Half the participants were allowed to sleep normally. The other half were kept awake the night after vaccination. The result? The sleep-deprived group produced significantly fewer antibodies. Their immune systems simply didn't respond as robustly. Not because they were inherently weaker, but because they were denied the hormonal environment that sleep provides. The prolactin surge, the growth hormone surge, the entire orchestrated response that tells the immune system, now is the time to remember this threat. Think about how often you've been told to rest when you're sick. It's not just folk wisdom, it's biology. Your body knows what it needs. And what it needs when fighting illness is the full suite of hormonal changes that only sleep can provide. But let's return to a question that might be on your mind if these hormones are so important. Why don't we just take them as supplements? Why not bypass the need for sleep altogether and just inject growth hormone, melatonin, prolactin, whatever the body needs? The answer is timing. Hormones don't work in isolation. They work in relation to each other in precise sequences with feedback loops that adjust their levels moment by moment. Taking a hormone supplement gives you a crude approximation of the right molecule at roughly the right time, but it can't replicate the intricate dance that happens naturally. The way melatonin sets the stage for growth hormone, the way growth hormone influences cortisol, the way cortisol interacts with prolactin. It's a system, and systems can't be reduced to their individual parts without losing something essential. Some athletes have tried taking synthetic growth hormone to improve performance, and in the short term, it works. Muscles grow, recovery speeds up, but over time the side effects accumulate. Joint pain, insulin resistance, increased risk of certain cancers. Because the body wasn't designed to have growth hormone flooding through it all the time. It was designed to receive it in pulses at specific times in coordination with sleep. The same is true for melatonin supplements. They can help reset your circadian rhythm if you're jet-lagged or working night shifts. But taking melatonin every night, especially at high doses, can actually desensitize your receptors. Your body starts to expect the external source and reduces its own production. The supplement becomes a crutch. And when you stop taking it, your natural rhythm takes even longer to reassert itself. The lesson here isn't that supplements are always bad. It's that nothing replaces the real thing. The natural, rhythmic, perfectly timed release of hormones that happens when you give your body what it was designed for: darkness, stillness, and time. Have you ever noticed how children, especially young ones, become almost unmanageable when they're overtired? They cry more easily. They can't focus. They're hyperactive one moment and collapsing the next. That's not just exhaustion. That's hormonal chaos. Their cortisol is spiking when it shouldn't. Their melatonin isn't rising when it should. Their growth hormone isn't being released in the amounts they need for their rapidly developing bodies. And the result is a system that can't regulate itself. Adults experience the same thing, but we've learned to mask it. We drink coffee to compensate for low cortisol in the morning. We scroll through screens to distract ourselves from the restlessness that comes when melatonin doesn't rise on schedule. We push through fatigue instead of listening to what our bodies are trying to tell us. And we convince ourselves that this is normal, that this is just what adult life feels like, but it's not. Or at least, it doesn't have to be. The hormonal symphony is still there waiting to play, waiting for the conditions it needs: darkness, consistency. Respect for the ancient rhythms that governed life long before electric lights and alarm clocks, and the expectation that we should be productive at all hours. Your body wants to heal you. It wants to restore you. It has an entire orchestra of chemical messengers ready to perform the most intricate biochemical ballet imaginable. All it asks in return is that you let it, that you give it the time and the environment it needs to do what it was designed to do. And while these hormones conduct their symphony in the bloodstream, another system is waking up another army, mobilizing in the darkness. An army that doesn't fight external invaders alone, but works in concert with every chemical signal, every cellular repair, every process we've explored so far to keep you whole in a world that's constantly trying to break you down. Right now, while you rest, there's a war being fought inside you, not a metaphor. An actual battle. Millions of invaders, viruses, and bacteria that slip past your defenses during the day are being hunted down by an army you'll never see. An army that becomes smarter, faster, more lethal while you sleep. Your immune system doesn't rest when you do. It wakes up. Most people think of immunity as a wall, a barrier that keeps bad things out. And there is some truth to that. Your skin is a barrier. The acid in your stomach is a barrier. But the real immune system, the one that matters when something gets through, isn't a wall at all. It's an intelligence network, a surveillance system that learns, remembers, and adapts. And sleep is when that system does its most important training. Let's start with the soldiers themselves, T cells. These are white blood cells that patrol your body looking for threats. When they find a cell that's been infected by a virus or a cell that's turned cancerous, they attack. They bind to the intruder and destroy it. Simple, brutal, effective. But here's what makes T cells remarkable. They don't just kill indiscriminately, they learn, they remember. And research shows they do this learning most effectively during sleep. In 2019, a scientist named Stoyan Dimitrov published a study that changed how we understand sleep and immunity. He and his team took blood samples from volunteers at different times of day and night. What they found was striking T cells taken from people during sleep were significantly more effective at binding to their targets than T cells taken from the same people while awake. Not because the cells themselves were different, but because sleep activated certain proteins on the T cell surface called integrins. These proteins act like sticky hands, helping T cells grab onto infected cells and hold them long enough to destroy them. Without sleep, the integrins don't activate properly. The T cells become clumsy, less able to latch on, less able to do their job. It's as if the soldiers are there ready to fight, but someone took away their weapons. Dimitrov's research also showed something else. Stress hormones, the ones that rise when you're awake and alert, actually suppress integrin activation. Evolution designed it this way. Some researchers suggest because during waking hours, your body prioritizes immediate survival, fighting off a predator, finding food, navigating social threats. The immune system takes a back seat. But when you sleep, when stress hormones drop, and the body can afford to focus inward, the immune system is unleashed, given permission to do what it does best. Think about the last time you got sick. Maybe you felt fine during the day, busy, distracted, functional. But at night, when you tried to sleep, the symptoms intensified. Fever spiked, body aches worsened. You felt miserable. That wasn't coincidence. That was your immune system ramping up, deploying its full arsenal under the cover of darkness. The fever wasn't the illness. The fever was the cure. Your body raising its internal temperature to make the environment inhospitable for pathogens. And it does this most aggressively at night, because that's when you can afford to be uncomfortable. When you're not hunting, not gathering, not needing to appear strong in front of others. But T cells are only part of the story. There's an entire ecosystem of immune cells, each with its own role. Natural killer cells that hunt down virus-infected cells and tumor cells. B cells that produce antibodies, those Y-shaped proteins that tag invaders for destruction. Macrophages that engulf debris and dead cells like microscopic vacuum cleaners. And all of these cells communicate with each other through chemical signals called cytokines. Cytokines are fascinating. They're small proteins that immune cells use to send messages. Some cytokines say, "There's an infection here, send reinforcements." Others say, "The threat is neutralized, stand down." During sleep, the production of certain cytokines increases dramatically. Interleukin-1, interleukin-6 tumor necrosis factor, alpha. These tongue-twisting names represent molecules that coordinate immune responses. They tell your body where to send resources, what kind of response is needed, how long to sustain the attack. There's a particular cytokine called interleukin-12 that researchers find especially interesting in the context of sleep. IL-12, as it's abbreviated, helps drive the differentiation of naive T cells into specialized killer cells. It's like taking a new recruit and training them to become an elite soldier. And the production of IL-12, research shows, follows a circadian rhythm. It peaks during sleep. When you deprive yourself of sleep, IL-12 production drops. Your immune system still has soldiers, but they're not as well trained, not as specialized, not as effective. This brings us to a study that's almost cruel in its clarity. In 2009, researchers at Carnegie Mellon University recruited 153 healthy volunteers. They measured how much each person slept over 2 weeks. Then they exposed everyone to rhinovirus, the virus that causes the common cold. They literally put virus-laden droplets into people's noses and waited to see who got sick. The results were dose-dependent, and unmistakable people who slept less than 7 hours a night were nearly 3 times more likely to develop a cold than those who slept 8 hours or more. And those who slept less than 5 hours, they were 4.5 times more likely to get sick. Same virus, same exposure, different outcomes based purely on sleep. That's how much immunity depends on rest. But why? Why would a few hours of sleep make such a dramatic difference? The answer lies in something called immune memory. When your body encounters a pathogen, it doesn't just fight it off and forget. It creates memory cells, specialized immune cells, that remember that specific invader. So if you encounter the same pathogen again, even years later, your immune system can mount a faster, stronger response. This is how vaccines work. They introduce a harmless version of a pathogen, train your immune system to recognize it, and then rely on memory cells to protect you if the real thing shows up. But forming these memory cells requires time and resources. And sleep is when your body allocates those resources. There's a study from 2012 that vaccinated people against hepatitis A and then tracked their antibody responses. Half the participants slept normally after vaccination. The other half were kept awake. 4 weeks later, the sleep-deprived group had antibody levels that were less than half of what the well-rested group produced. Their immune systems had seen the vaccine. They'd responded to it. But without sleep, they couldn't form robust, long-lasting memory. The protection was weak, temporary, insufficient. Some researchers believe this is one reason why shift workers, people who chronically disrupt their sleep schedules, have higher rates of infections and worse vaccine responses. Their immune systems are constantly trying to learn, trying to remember, but never getting the uninterrupted time they need to consolidate that learning. Now let's talk about inflammation. You've probably heard that chronic inflammation is bad, that it's linked to heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer. And that's true. But acute inflammation, the kind that happens when you're fighting an infection or healing an injury, is essential. It's your immune system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The problem is when inflammation doesn't turn off, when it becomes chronic, when the immune system keeps sounding the alarm even after the threat is gone. Sleep is one of the primary mechanisms your body uses to regulate inflammation. During sleep, anti-inflammatory signals increase. Certain cytokines that promote inflammation decrease. The immune system recalibrates, distinguishing between real threats that need aggressive responses and false alarms that should be ignored. Without enough sleep, this recalibration doesn't happen. Inflammatory markers stay elevated. The immune system becomes hypersensitive, overreacting to minor stimuli, attacking things it shouldn't. There's a condition called autoimmune disease, where the immune system attacks the body's own tissues. Rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes. In all of these conditions, something has gone wrong with the immune system's ability to distinguish self from non-self. And while the causes are complex and not fully understood, research increasingly shows that sleep disturbances precede and worsen autoimmune conditions. It seems as though the immune system, when chronically sleep-deprived, loses some of its precision, some of its wisdom. It starts fighting shadows. But it's not just about avoiding disease. It's about optimizing health. Even if you never get sick, even if your immune system never faces a serious threat, it's still working every single day to clean up damaged cells, clear out debris, maintain the integrity of your tissues. This baseline maintenance requires energy and coordination, and sleep is when the body can afford to dedicate resources to it. There's a concept in immunology called immune surveillance. It's the idea that your immune system is constantly patrolling your body, looking for cells that have turned cancerous. Every day, through random mutations and environmental damage, some of your cells develop the potential to become tumors. But most of the time, your immune system catches them early. Natural killer cells recognize something wrong with the cell's surface markers and destroy it before it can multiply. This happens thousands of times over your lifetime. You never know it's happening. You never feel it. But it's one of the reasons you're still alive. And this surveillance research suggests is most active during sleep, when inflammation is low, when cytokines are balanced, when immune cells can focus on quality control rather than emergency response. Chronic sleep deprivation has been linked to higher cancer rates in epidemiological studies, not because sleep directly causes cancer, but because inadequate sleep weakens the surveillance system. The guards are still there, but they're exhausted, distracted, less vigilant. And occasionally something slips through that shouldn't. Have you ever noticed that when you're really stressed for weeks or months, you get sick more often? That's not psychological. That's immunological. Chronic stress, the kind that keeps cortisol elevated and sleep disrupted, directly suppresses immune function. It tells the body that survival right now is more important than long-term health. And the body listens. It sacrifices immunity to preserve energy for immediate threats, which made sense when the threats were short-term, a predator, a famine, a conflict. But in the modern world, where stress is constant and rarely life-threatening, this trade-off becomes destructive. Sleep is the antidote, the signal that tells your body it's safe, that it can afford to invest in repair and defense, that the threats have passed and now is the time to prepare for future ones. There's a beautiful irony in all of this. People often sacrifice sleep to be more productive, to get more done, to stay ahead. But in doing so, they weaken the very system that keeps them functional. They trade days of alertness for weeks of illness. They trade short-term gains for long-term decline. And they don't realize it's happening until the damage is done. Until the immune system, exhausted from years of neglect, can no longer keep up. But the reverse is also true. Prioritize sleep. Give your immune system the time it needs, and you don't just avoid getting sick. You become more resilient, more adaptable, better able to handle the inevitable exposures and injuries that come with being alive. Your T cells sharpen their aim. Your memory cells remember more clearly. Your inflammatory responses stay balanced. You become harder to break. And this resilience extends beyond immunity. Because while your white blood cells are learning and fighting in the darkness, another system is quietly resetting. Another set of processes is ensuring that the fuel you consume today becomes the energy you'll use wisely in the days ahead. The machinery of metabolism, vast and intricate, is awakening to its own night shift. Every cell in your body runs on fuel, not metaphorically, literally. Glucose. The simple sugar that flows through your bloodstream is what keeps your neurons firing, your muscles contracting, your heart beating. But fuel is only useful if your cells can access it, and sleep is when your body recalibrates the entire system that decides which cells get fed and which ones wait. This is the metabolic night shift, the quiet redistribution of energy that determines whether you wake up restored or depleted. Metabolism isn't just about calories, it's about chemistry, about how your body converts food into usable energy, stores the excess, releases it when needed, and maintains the delicate balance between having enough and having too much. And this balance, research shows, is profoundly influenced by sleep. Not just how much you sleep, but the quality, the timing, the consistency of it. Let's start with insulin. You've probably heard of it. The hormone produced by your pancreas that allows glucose to enter your cells. When you eat, your blood sugar rises. Insulin is released. The glucose moves from your bloodstream into muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells, wherever it's needed. Simple, elegant, until it stops working. Insulin resistance is what happens when cells stop responding properly to insulin's signal. The glucose stays in the bloodstream. The pancreas produces more insulin, trying to force the cells to listen. Eventually, blood sugar stays chronically elevated. Tissues get damaged. And you end up with type 2 diabetes, a disease that affects hundreds of millions of people worldwide and is largely preventable. What does this have to do with sleep everything? In 1999, researchers at the University of Chicago conducted an experiment that's still cited today. They recruited healthy young adults with no history of diabetes or metabolic problems. These were people with perfectly functioning insulin systems. The researchers restricted their sleep to just 4 hours a night for 6 consecutive nights. Not extreme deprivation, not torture. Just the kind of sleep debt many people accumulate during a busy work week. Then they measured insulin sensitivity, how effectively the cells responded to insulin. The results were shocking. After less than a week of modest sleep restriction, the participants' insulin sensitivity dropped by 30%. 30%. Their cells responded to insulin the way the cells of a pre-diabetic person would respond. But here's the crucial part. When the participants were allowed to sleep normally, again their insulin sensitivity returned to baseline. The damage wasn't permanent, it was reversible. Sleep wasn't just correlated with metabolic health, it was directly causing metabolic health. And the absence of sleep was directly causing metabolic dysfunction. Think about what this means. Every night you cut sleep short, every night you stay up scrolling or working or worrying, you're temporarily making yourself pre-diabetic. Your cells are refusing to take in glucose properly. Your blood sugar is spiking higher than it should. Your pancreas is working overtime. And if this becomes chronic, if you do this week after week, year after year, the temporary dysfunction becomes permanent. The cells forget how to respond. The system breaks. Some scientists suggest this is one reason why the obesity and diabetes epidemics have paralleled the rise of chronic sleep deprivation in modern society. We're not just eating more, we're sleeping less. And those two things interact in ways that compound the damage. But insulin is only half the story. There are 2 other hormones that control hunger and satiety, ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. It's produced in your stomach and tells your brain, I'm empty, find food. Leptin is the satiety hormone. It's produced by fat cells and tells your brain, we have enough stored energy, stop eating. In a well-rested person, these hormones work in harmony. Ghrelin rises before meals. Leptin rises after meals. Hunger comes when it should. Fullness comes when it should. You eat what you need and stop. But when you don't sleep enough, this harmony collapses. Research from the University of Chicago. The same team that studied insulin found that sleep restriction causes ghrelin levels to increase and leptin levels to decrease. Translation, you feel hungrier than you should and less satisfied when you eat. Your brain is receiving false signals. It thinks you're starving even when you're not. And so, you eat more. Not because you lack willpower, not because you're lazy, but because your hormones are lying to you. The participants in the study reported craving high carbohydrate, high calorie foods. Cookies, chips, candy, not salads, not vegetables. The brain, sensing what it interprets as an energy crisis, drives you toward calorie-dense foods. Foods that would help you survive a famine. But there's no famine. There's just a sleep debt. And the result is weight gain, insulin resistance, and all the metabolic problems that follow. Have you ever noticed that when you're tired, you crave junk food? That's not a character flaw. That's biology. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, prioritize immediate energy over long-term health. The problem is that the environment has changed faster than evolution can keep up. In the ancestral past, if you were chronically sleep-deprived, it probably meant you were in genuine danger, a predator nearby, a harsh winter, a resource scarcity. Eating calorie-dense food in that context was adaptive. It kept you alive. But in the modern world, where sleep deprivation is voluntary and food is abundant, this same mechanism makes you sick. Now, let's talk about what happens to fat while you sleep. Most people think of fat as static, as something that just sits there inert, waiting to be burned off through exercise or diet. But fat cells are metabolically active. They respond to hormones. they release signaling molecules. And during certain stages of sleep, particularly during REM sleep, fat cells increase lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat, into free fatty acids that can be used for energy. This doesn't mean you lose significant weight just by sleeping, though sleep does support healthy weight management. What it means is that your body is constantly cycling through its energy stores, testing them, making sure they're accessible when needed. Sleep is when this cycling happens most efficiently, when the body can afford to release stored energy without the immediate demands of muscle movement or digestion competing for resources. There's also something called brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that generates heat instead of storing energy. Babies have a lot of it. Adults have some mostly around the neck and shoulders. Brown fat burns calories to keep you warm, and research shows that its activity is influenced by sleep. People who sleep well tend to have more active brown fat. People who are chronically sleep deprived have less. It's as if the body, sensing constant stress, decides to conserve energy rather than waste it on heat production. Another adaptive response that made sense in the past, but becomes maladaptive in the present. Let's shift focus to the liver. Your liver is one of the most metabolically versatile organs in your body. It stores glucose as glycogen. It converts excess glucose into fat. It breaks down fat into ketones when glucose is scarce. It detoxifies chemicals. It produces proteins. It does hundreds of biochemical reactions simultaneously. And it does much of this work at night. During the day when you're eating, an act of your liver is responding to incoming nutrients, storing some, releasing some, maintaining blood sugar levels so your brain doesn't run out of fuel. But at night when digestion slows and you're not consuming food, the liver shifts modes. It starts releasing stored glycogen back into the bloodstream, maintaining a steady supply of glucose for the brain and other essential tissues. This process, called glycogenolysis, follows a circadian rhythm. It's time to match the expected fasting period of sleep. But if you don't sleep, if you stay up eating late-night snacks or drinking sugary beverages, you disrupt this rhythm. The liver gets confused. It's trying to release stored energy, but you keep adding more. The storage systems become overwhelmed. Fat accumulates in liver cells, a condition called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And this condition, once rare, is now epidemic, affecting roughly a quarter of adults in developed countries. Sleep disruption, some researchers suggest, is one of the contributing factors. There's a particularly elegant study from 2016 that tracked people's metabolic markers over several years. The researchers controlled for diet, exercise, genetics, everything they could think of. And still, sleep duration emerged as an independent predictor of metabolic health. People who consistently slept 7 to 8 hours a night had better glucose control, better insulin sensitivity, healthier lipid profiles. Not because they were trying harder, not because they had better genes, but because their bodies had the time they needed to regulate metabolism properly. And here's something most people don't consider. Metabolism isn't just about energy balance. It's about cellular health. Every metabolic reaction produces byproducts, some useful, some toxic. When metabolism is efficient, when insulin is working, when glucose is being used properly, these byproducts are managed. But when metabolism becomes dysfunctional, when cells can't access glucose, even though it's abundant in the bloodstream, those cells start breaking down other things for fuel, proteins, structural components, things they shouldn't be breaking down, and the byproducts accumulate. Advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, are one example. These are compounds that form when sugar molecules bind to proteins or fats in the bloodstream. They're sticky, they damage tissues, they contribute to aging, and their formation accelerates when blood sugar is chronically elevated, which happens when you're sleep deprived and insulin resistant. So, poor sleep doesn't just affect how you feel today, it affects how your body ages over decades. Some people try to compensate for poor sleep with diet or exercise. They think, if I just eat clean and work out hard, I can make up for the sleep I'm missing. And while diet and exercise are important, they can't fully compensate for sleep deprivation. Because metabolism is regulated at a hormonal level, at a cellular level, in ways that food and physical activity can't override. You can eat perfectly and still have insulin resistance if you're not sleeping. You can exercise daily and still have elevated ghrelin if you're chronically fatigued. Sleep is the foundation. Everything else builds on it. There's a concept in physiology called metabolic flexibility. It's the ability to switch between burning carbohydrates and burning fat, depending on what's available. A metabolically flexible person can go several hours without eating and feel fine because their body smoothly transitions to burning stored fat. A metabolically inflexible person crashes. They get shaky, irritable, foggy-headed if they miss a meal. Their bodies have lost the ability to access stored energy efficiently. And what determines metabolic flexibility? Many things: diet, exercise, genetics. But increasingly, research points to sleep as a critical factor. People who sleep well tend to be more metabolically flexible. Their bodies switch fuel sources easily. They have stable energy throughout the day. People who don't sleep well become rigidly dependent on constant glucose intake. They need frequent meals. They crave sugar. They can't access their fat stores effectively. The machinery is there, but it's not responding to the signals properly. Have you ever wondered why fasting feels harder when you're tired? That's metabolic inflexibility. Your body knows it has stored energy, tens of thousands of calories and fat, reserves, but it can't access them efficiently because the hormonal environment is all wrong. Cortisol is elevated, signaling stress. Insulin sensitivity is reduced. Ghrelin is high. The brain interprets this as a crisis and demands immediate food. And the willpower required to resist that demand is immense because you're fighting against fundamental biology. But give yourself adequate sleep night after night and the flexibility returns. The hormones rebalance. The cells remember how to respond. And fasting, or even just going several hours between meals, becomes effortless. Not because you've become stronger, but because your metabolism has become functional again. The tragedy is that most people never make this connection. They struggle with their weight, with their energy, with their blood sugar, and they blame themselves. They think they're failing at discipline, at commitment, at self-control. But the real failure is systemic. It's a culture that devalues rest, that glorifies exhaustion, that treats sleep as negotiable. And the price of that failure is metabolic disease on a scale humanity has never seen before. Your cells aren't lazy, they're waiting for the conditions they need to do what they were designed to do, to regulate, to balance, to maintain the intricate dance between feeding and fasting, between storing and releasing, between growth and repair. And those conditions require darkness, stillness, and the trust that comes from knowing it's safe to stop consuming and start restoring. But metabolism doesn't work in isolation from the rest of the body. The energy it produces, the fuel it distributes, all of it flows through a circulatory system that has its own rhythms, its own needs, its own way of recovering in the quiet hours. And it's there in the steady pulse that never stops that we find another dimension of the night shift's silent labor. Your heart has been beating since before you were born, before you took your first breath, before you had thoughts or memories or a name. Roughly 3 billion times so far if you're an average adult, 3 billion contractions without a single break. And yet it doesn't wear out. It doesn't collapse from exhaustion. Because every night while you sleep, it gets something it can never have. While you're awake, permission to slow down. This is when your cardiovascular system recovers from the relentless work of keeping you alive. Most people think of the heart as a simple pump. Blood goes in, blood goes out. But it's so much more than that. It's a muscle that has to generate precise amounts of force, perfectly timed, responding instantly to changing demands. When you stand up, it has to pump harder to fight gravity. When you exercise, it has to quadruple its output. When you're frightened, it has to prepare you to run. And it does all of this while maintaining blood pressure, oxygen delivery, and nutrient distribution to every cell in your body. exhausting work, unrelenting work, work that can only be sustained because sleep gives the cardiovascular system a chance to reset. Let's start with something simple but profound: your heart rate. During the day, your average resting heart rate might be 70 beats per minute. But when you fall into deep sleep, it drops, sometimes to 50 beats per minute, sometimes lower. That might not sound like much, but over the course of a night, it means your heart beats several thousand fewer times than it would if you stayed awake. Several thousand contractions it doesn't have to perform. Several thousand moments of slightly less strain on the muscle. But it's not just the number of beats, it's the variability. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is a measure of the tiny fluctuations in the time between heartbeats. When you're stressed, when you're awake and alert, these fluctuations decrease. Your heart beats like a metronome, rigid, consistent, driven by the sympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system responsible for fight or flight. But when you sleep, particularly during deep sleep, HRV increases. The time between beats becomes more variable, more flexible. And this variability, research shows, is a marker of cardiovascular health. High HRV means your autonomic nervous system is balanced, that your body can shift smoothly between stress and recovery, that your heart is resilient, adaptable, able to respond to changing demands without getting stuck in one mode. Low HRV, on the other hand, is associated with chronic stress, inflammation, and increased risk of heart disease. And one of the most reliable ways to improve HRV is simply to sleep well, consistently, night after night. There's a branch of your nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. If the sympathetic system is the accelerator, the parasympathetic system is the brake. It's responsible for rest, digestion, healing, all the processes that happen when you're safe and relaxed. And the main nerve of the parasympathetic system is the vagus nerve, a wandering pathway that connects your brain to your heart, lungs, digestive tract, and other organs. During sleep, vagal activity increases. The vagus nerve sends signals to your heart, slowing it down, allowing it to beat with less force, giving it time to recover. Some researchers describe this as the heart's nighttime maintenance window. The muscle fibers repair themselves. The coronary arteries, the blood vessels that feed the heart itself, dilate slightly, allowing more blood flow to the tissue. The entire organ gets a reprieve from the constant demands of waking life. But what happens if you don't sleep? What happens when the heart never gets this recovery window? There's something called nocturnal dipping, and it's one of the most important cardiovascular phenomena most people have never heard of. In a healthy person, blood pressure drops by 10 to 20% during sleep. This dip is essential. It gives your blood vessels a break from the constant pressure of pushing blood through 75,000 miles of circulatory pathways. It allows the endothelial cells, the delicate lining of your blood vessels, to repair damage accumulated during the day. But in people who don't sleep well, in people with sleep apnea or chronic insomnia, or who simply don't get enough sleep, this dip doesn't happen. Their blood pressure stays elevated all night. The vessels never get a break, and over time, this lack of dipping is associated with dramatically increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and heart failure. Not because the daytime blood pressure is higher, but because the nighttime blood pressure never goes down. There's a massive study called the Framingham Heart Study that's been following participants for decades, tracking their health outcomes in meticulous detail. The data from Framingham and similar studies show a clear, consistent pattern. People who sleep less than 6 hours a night have a 40% higher risk of developing coronary heart disease compared to those who sleep 7 to 8 hours. 40%. And this holds true even after controlling for other risk factors like diet, exercise, smoking, and genetics. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but researchers believe it involves inflammation, autonomic imbalance, and the lack of nocturnal blood pressure dipping. The heart is being asked to work at full capacity 24 hours a day. And no muscle, no matter how strong, can sustain that indefinitely. Now, Let's talk about something most people don't think about: the endothelium. This is the single layer of cells that lines the inside of every blood vessel in your body. One cell thick, impossibly delicate. And yet, this thin layer is responsible for regulating blood flow, preventing clots, controlling inflammation, and maintaining vascular health. When endothelial cells function properly, your blood vessels dilate when they should constrict, when they should stay smooth and slippery, so blood can flow freely. But endothelial cells are constantly being damaged by high blood pressure, by oxidized cholesterol, by inflammatory molecules circulating in the blood. And if this damage isn't repaired, the vessels become stiff, narrow, prone to forming plaques and clots. This is atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries that underlies most heart attacks and strokes. Sleep is when endothelial repair happens most effectively. Research shows that during sleep, the production of nitric oxide increases in blood vessel walls. Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule that helps blood vessels relax and dilate. It also has anti-inflammatory and anti-clotting properties. Some scientists believe the surge in nitric oxide during sleep is one of the body's primary mechanisms for maintaining vascular health. It's the nightly repair crew, smoothing over the rough patches, keeping the vessels flexible and responsive. When you chronically deprive yourself of sleep, nitric oxide production decreases. The vessels become stiffer, the endothelium becomes less responsive, and the risk of cardiovascular events increases. Not someday in the distant future, now. With every night of inadequate sleep, there's a particularly sobering natural experiment that happens twice a year. In most countries, the transition to and from daylight saving time. When clocks spring forward and people lose an hour of sleep, hospital admissions for heart attacks increase by about 24% the following day. When clocks fall back and people gain an hour, heart attacks decrease 1 hour. That's all it takes to see a measurable impact on cardiovascular events at a population level. Think about what that means. If losing 1 hour of sleep for a single night increases heart attack risk, what does losing an hour or two every night for years do? But it's not just about disease prevention. It's about performance. Athletes have known for years that sleep affects cardiovascular capacity. Your VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen your body can use during intense exercise, is influenced by sleep. When you're well rested, your heart pumps more efficiently. Your blood carries oxygen more effectively. Your muscles extract that oxygen and use it to generate energy. Everything works better. When you're sleep deprived, even if you're physically fit, your cardiovascular performance declines. The machinery is the same, but it's not operating at peak efficiency. There's a study that measured the performance of competitive swimmers. When they extended their sleep to 10 hours a night for several weeks, their sprint times improved, their turn times improved, their mood improved, and their resting heart rates decreased, a sign of improved cardiovascular fitness. They weren't training more. They weren't pushing harder. They were simply giving their bodies the recovery time they needed. Have you ever noticed that when you're exhausted, your heart seems to pound harder, even when you're at rest? That's not your imagination. That's your sympathetic nervous system stuck in overdrive. Your body thinks it's in danger. It's preparing for threats that aren't there. And your heart is bearing the burden of that false alarm. Now let's consider something more subtle, the circadian rhythm of heart function. Your cardiovascular system doesn't just respond to whether you're awake or asleep. It anticipates. Based on millions of years of evolution, your body expects certain patterns. It expects to be active during the day and at rest during the night. It expects blood pressure to rise in the morning and fall in the evening. It expects heart rate to fluctuate in predictable ways. But shift workers, people who work nights or rotating schedules, disrupt these patterns. Their bodies try to be awake when every cellular signal says it should be asleep. And the cardiovascular consequences are severe. Shift workers have higher rates of hypertension, higher rates of heart disease, and shorter lifespans on average. Not because the work itself is harder, but because the timing is wrong. The heart is being asked to operate out of sync with its own internal rhythms. There's something called chronotherapy, the practice of timing medication to match the body's natural rhythms. For instance, blood pressure medication taken at night is often more effective than the same medication taken in the morning, because the body's response to the drug changes depending on the time of day. It seems as though the cardiovascular system has a memory, a clock, that determines how it responds to interventions. And this clock is set by sleep. When you sleep consistently at roughly the same time each night, your cardiovascular system locks into a rhythm. It knows when to expect rest. It can prepare for it, optimize for it. But when your sleep schedule is erratic, when you go to bed at midnight one night and 3 in the morning, the next the clock gets confused. The heart doesn't know when to expect recovery. And so, it never fully commits to it. Some people think they can catch up on sleep over the weekend. Sleep 5 hours a night during the week, then 10 hours on Saturday and Sunday, and everything balances out. But research shows that's not how it works. Cardiovascular stress accumulates daily. The damage to endothelial cells, the elevated blood pressure, the reduced HRV. These things happen in real time. And while you can partially recover with extra sleep, you can't fully erase the damage. It's like running a car engine at maximum RPM for days, and then letting it idle for a few hours. Better than nothing, but not the same as maintaining a steady, sustainable pace all along. There's also a connection between sleep and blood clotting. During sleep, the balance between pro-clotting and anti-clotting factors shifts. Your blood becomes slightly less likely to form clots, which makes sense because you're lying still not moving, not at immediate risk of injury. But when you don't sleep, this balance is disrupted. Pro-clotting factors stay elevated, and the risk of thrombosis, the formation of dangerous clots in veins or arteries, increases. This is one reason why long flights where people sit still for hours in a dehydrated state sometimes lead to blood clots. The lack of movement is part of it, but the sleep disruption, the circadian misalignment, also plays a role. The body's clotting system doesn't know how to behave when the normal cues are absent. And then there's the relationship between sleep and cholesterol. While diet certainly influences cholesterol levels, research shows that sleep does too. People who sleep poorly tend to have higher levels of LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, and lower levels of HDL, the good cholesterol. The mechanisms aren't entirely clear, but it seems to involve liver function inflammation and the hormonal regulation of lipid metabolism, another system thrown off balance when the foundation of sleep is compromised. Your heart doesn't ask for much. It doesn't need supplements or special diets or expensive interventions. It just needs rhythm, consistency, time. It needs the same thing it's needed for the entire history of your species. The opportunity to slow down in the dark, to recover in the quiet, to trust that the world will still be there when the sun rises and it's time to start beating faster again. But the heart is only one part of the story. Because while the cardiovascular system is resting and repairing in the stillness, another set of tissues is undergoing its own transformation. Tissues that bear the weight of every step, every movement, every moment of physical existence. And it's in these tissues and the architecture of strength itself that the night reveals yet another layer of cellular dedication. Every time you move, you damage yourself. Not catastrophically, not irreversibly, but microscopically. Tiny tears in muscle fibers, stress fractures in bone, strain in tendons and ligaments. By the end of the day, your body is a landscape of small destructions, evidence of every step, every lift, every moment you ask your tissues to bear weight or generate force. And yet, you wake up stronger, not weaker. Because sleep is when destruction becomes construction. This is the paradox of physical strength. You don't build it by working. You build it by resting after work. Let's start with muscle tissue. Your muscles are made of long thread-like cells called myofibers. These fibers contract when you need to move, pulling on bones, generating force. But they're not indestructible. When you exercise, especially when you lift something heavy or run farther than you're used to, the mechanical stress creates microscopic tears in the myofibers. You can feel this damage. It's the soreness that arrives a day or two after an intense workout. The stiffness, the tenderness. That's not lactic acid despite what many people believe. That's inflammation. Your immune system responding to damaged tissue. But here's what matters. Those tears are the signal for growth. When a muscle fiber is damaged, satellite cells, a type of stem cell that lives dormant in muscle tissue, wake up. They migrate to the site of injury. And during deep sleep, when growth hormone surges through your bloodstream, these satellite cells fuse with the damaged fibers, donating their nuclei, their genetic material, making the fiber slightly thicker, slightly stronger than it was before. This process is called hypertrophy. And it doesn't happen in the gym, it happens in bed. In 1997, a researcher named William Kramer published a study that fundamentally changed how we understand muscle recovery. He measured the levels of various hormones in athletes before, during, and after resistance training. What he found was that while exercise triggered a modest increase in growth hormone and testosterone, the real surge happened hours later during sleep. Specifically during slow-wave sleep, the deepest stage when the brain is least active, and the body can dedicate maximum resources to repair. The athletes who slept well after training showed greater increases in muscle mass and strength over time compared to those who didn't, even when the training itself was identical. Sleep wasn't just helpful, it was the mechanism through which training produced results. Think about the athletes you admire, the ones who perform at the highest levels. Roger Federer, one of the greatest tennis players in history, has said he sleeps 12 hours a night when training. LeBron James, who has maintained elite performance well into his late 30s, prioritizes 10 to 12 hours of sleep. Usain Bolt, the fastest human ever recorded, has spoken about the importance of afternoon naps in addition to nighttime sleep. These aren't people who don't understand hard work. They understand that work without recovery is just damage, and recovery requires time in the dark. But muscles are only part of the musculoskeletal system. Bones, those rigid structures we think of as static and unchanging, are actually dynamic tissues. They're constantly being broken down and rebuilt in a process called remodeling. Cells called osteoclasts dissolve old bone tissue. Cells called osteoblasts build new bone tissue to replace it. And the balance between these two processes determines whether your bones strengthen or weaken over time. During childhood and adolescence, bone formation outpaces bone breakdown. Your skeleton grows, lengthens, thickens. But in adulthood, the process shifts. The goal is no longer growth, but maintenance. Replacing old damaged bone with new strong bone. And this replacement happens most actively during sleep. There's research showing that growth hormone and another hormone called insulin-like growth factor, both of which peak during sleep, stimulate osteoblast activity. They tell the bone-building cells to work harder to lay down more mineral to reinforce the structure. Meanwhile, certain inflammatory cytokines that promote osteoclast activity, that tell the bone-dissolving cells to work, are suppressed during sleep. The balance tips in favor of building rather than breaking. This is why astronauts who live in zero gravity, where bones aren't subjected to the stress of bearing weight, lose bone density so rapidly. But it's also why people who don't sleep well lose bone density faster than those who do, even here on Earth, where gravity is constant. The stress on the bones might be the same, but the recovery process is compromised. The osteoblasts aren't getting the hormonal signals they need. The remodeling tips toward breakdown. There's a condition called osteoporosis, where bones become porous, brittle, prone to fracture. It's often thought of as a disease of aging, particularly in postmenopausal women. And while hormonal changes absolutely play a role, sleep disturbances are increasingly recognized as a contributing factor. People with chronic insomnia have lower bone mineral density on average, not because they're less active, but because their bones aren't being given the nightly signal to rebuild. Now, let's talk about connective tissue. Tendons, ligaments, fascia. These structures don't get much attention, but they're essential. They connect muscle to bone to bone, and they wrap around muscles, providing structure and transmitting force. And like everything else, they're subject to wear and tear. Collagen, the protein that gives connective tissue its strength and flexibility, degrades over time. Fibers fray. Elasticity decreases. And if this degradation isn't matched by synthesis of new collagen, injuries happen. Tendinitis, ligament sprains, chronic pain. Collagen synthesis, research shows, is influenced by growth hormone and by mechanical loading. When you use a tendon, when you stress it through movement, the cells within the tendon, called tenocytes, receive signals to produce more collagen. But the actual production, the assembly of collagen molecules into organized fibers, happens primarily during rest, during sleep. Athletes who overtrain, who push their bodies day after day without adequate rest, often develop tendon problems, not because they're weak, but because they're not giving their tendons time to rebuild. The breakdown is constant, the synthesis can't keep up, and eventually the tissue fails. A torn Achilles tendon, a ruptured ACL, injuries that end careers, all because the rhythm of stress and recovery was ignored. There's a particularly illuminating study from Stanford University that tracked college football players over a season. The researchers monitored sleep duration and injury rates. What they found was that players who slept less than 8 hours a night were 1.7 times more likely to suffer an injury compared to those who slept more. Same training, same coaching, same competition, different sleep, different outcomes. And it's not just professional athletes. Weekend warriors, people who exercise recreationally, experience the same pattern. If you go for a long run on Saturday and then stay up late, your muscles don't recover as well. The inflammation lingers. The micro tears don't fully heal. And when you run again the following weekend, you're starting from a deficit. Over time, this accumulates. Chronic soreness, decreased performance, increased injury risk. The body is willing to work, but it needs the conditions to repair. Let's consider fascia, a tissue that's gained attention in recent years, but is still poorly understood by most people. Fascia is a web of connective tissue that surrounds every muscle, every organ, every structure in your body. It provides support, transmits mechanical forces, and communicates information about tension and position. When fascia is healthy, it's smooth, hydrated, flexible. When it's unhealthy, it becomes sticky, rigid, painful. Research suggests that fascia remodels itself during sleep. The fibroblasts, the cells within fascia, produce new collagen and break down old, damaged fibers. They also secrete hyaluronic acid, a molecule that lubricates the tissue, allowing layers of fascia to slide over each other smoothly. But this remodeling requires stillness. When you're moving, the fascia is under tension. The cells are responding to mechanical stress. Only when you lie down, when gravity is no longer pulling on the tissue, when muscles relax, can the fascia truly reorganize itself. People who work on their feet all day, people who never lie down, never fully relax, often develop fascial adhesions, areas where the tissue has stuck together, limiting movement, causing pain. Massage can help. Stretching can help, but the most fundamental treatment is rest, giving the fascia time to repair itself without constant mechanical stress. Have you ever woken up feeling stiff, especially if you're older, and noticed that the stiffness fades after a few minutes of movement? That's fascia. It's been relatively immobile all night, and it needs a moment to remember how to glide. But that stiffness is a small price to pay for the remodeling that happened while you slept. The cells were working, rebuilding, maintaining the structural integrity that allows you to move without pain. There's also a relationship between sleep and muscle glycogen, the stored form of glucose that muscles use for fuel during exercise. After intense activity, glycogen stores are depleted. Your muscles are literally out of energy. And while eating carbohydrates helps replenish glycogen, the most efficient restoration happens during sleep. The muscles are at rest, not demanding energy for contraction. The liver can focus on converting glucose into glycogen and shipping it to muscle tissue. By morning, if you've slept well and eaten adequately, your glycogen stores are back to baseline. You're ready to perform again. But if you don't sleep, glycogen replenishment is slower, incomplete. You wake up still depleted, and when you try to exercise on depleted glycogen, performance suffers. You fatigue faster. You can't generate as much force. Your brain, sensing low energy availability, tells your muscles to conserve. It's a protective mechanism, but it's frustrating if you're trying to improve. Some people try to compensate with stimulants, caffeine, pre-workout supplements, energy drinks, and these can temporarily override the fatigue signals. They can make you feel alert, ready, capable, but they don't restore glycogen. They don't repair muscle fibers. They don't rebuild bone or fascia. They just mask the problem while the underlying deficit worsens. Eventually, the body can't be tricked anymore, and the crash when it comes is severe. Now let's talk about something most people never consider: the age at which you stop growing taller. For most people, that's late adolescence. Somewhere between 15 and 20 years old, the growth plates in your long bones close. You reach your maximum height, but muscle can continue growing, continue adapting well into old age. There are people in their 70s who build muscle through resistance training. It's slower than it would be at 20. The hormonal environment is different, but it's still possible, as long as the stimulus is there, as long as the recovery is there. And what determines how well an older person can build muscle sleep is one of the biggest factors. Older adults who sleep well maintain better muscle mass, better strength, better functional capacity than those who don't. Not because they're more active though, activity certainly helps, but because their bodies are still receiving the nightly signal to repair and grow. The machinery still works. It just needs the right conditions. There's a tragic irony in how modern culture approaches physical fitness. We glorify the grind, the early morning workouts, the late-night training sessions, the ability to push through fatigue. And while discipline and effort matter, this mentality ignores the fundamental biology of adaptation. Your body doesn't get stronger when you work. It gets stronger when you rest after work. The work is the stimulus. The rest is the adaptation. And if you skip the rest, you skip the adaptation. You just accumulate damage. Some of the most successful coaches and trainers, the ones who produce consistent results without burning people out, understand this. They program rest days as meticulously as they program workout days. They monitor their athletes' sleep. They adjust training volume based on recovery markers, because they know that a well-rested athlete with moderate training will outperform an exhausted athlete with maximum training every single time. The same principle applies to everyday life. You don't need to be an elite athlete to benefit from the muscle-building, bone-strengthening, fascia remodeling effects of sleep. Whether you're carrying groceries, playing with your children, or simply walking upstairs, you're using your musculoskeletal system. You're creating small amounts of damage, and that damage needs to be repaired. The quality of that repair determines whether you age into strength or into fragility. Your muscles, your bones, your connective tissues, they're all waiting for the same thing. Darkness, stillness, the hormonal environment that only sleep provides. They don't need much, just consistency. Just the trust that every period of stress will be followed by a period of restoration. Work, rest, work, rest. The rhythm that has sustained life since the first organisms learned to move. And as we've traveled through the body tonight, from neurons to immune cells, from metabolism to muscle, a pattern emerges. Not a pattern imposed from outside, but one that arises from within. The pattern of systems working in concert, each with its own rhythm, all synchronized to the oldest rhythm of all, the turning of the earth, the cycle of light and dark, the eternal dance between doing and being. We've traveled far tonight, through the quiet corridors of your brain where memories are carved into permanence, through the cellular repair shops where DNA is mended and proteins are folded back into their proper shapes, through the hormone symphony that conducts every system in perfect rhythm, through the immune battlefields where white cells sharpen their weapons, through the metabolic machinery that decides how energy flows, through the cardiovascular networks that pulse and rest and pulse again, through the muscles and bones and fascia that bear the weight of your existence and grow stronger in stillness. 37 trillion cells, each one a universe unto itself, each one working in darkness while you dream. But there's something we haven't fully addressed, something that underlies all of these processes, something so fundamental that it's easy to overlook. The question isn't just what your cells are doing while you sleep, it's why. Why did evolution design life this way? Why didn't we evolve to function continuously without the need for this strange daily surrender to unconsciousness? The answer some scientists suggest is that consciousness itself is expensive. Your brain, which represents only 2% of your body weight, consumes roughly 20% of your energy when you're awake. All that processing, all that attention, all that awareness of self and world, it requires immense resources. And while you're spending those resources on navigating reality, there's simply not enough left over for comprehensive repair and reorganization. Sleep isn't a design flaw, it's a solution. The only way a complex organism can maintain itself is to periodically shut down the most expensive systems and redirect energy toward maintenance. It's like a city that does road repair at night when traffic is minimal. You could try to fix the roads during rush hour, but it would be inefficient, dangerous, incomplete. Far better to wait for the quiet hours. But it's more than efficiency. There's something almost philosophical about the necessity of sleep. It suggests that existence requires rhythm, that growth requires rest, that creation requires destruction, that consciousness requires its opposite. We are not designed to be always on. We are designed to oscillate. And in that oscillation in the movement between waking and sleeping, we find not just health, but meaning. Think about the way we talk about sleep. We say we fall asleep as if it's a descent, a loss of control. We say we succumb to sleep as if it's a defeat. The language reveals a cultural bias, a belief that wakefulness is the default state and sleep is an unfortunate interruption. But what if that's backwards? What if sleep is the default, the state our cells most want to be in, and wakefulness is the temporary departure, the necessary but costly excursion into consciousness? There's evidence for this. Newborn babies sleep 16 to 18 hours a day. Their bodies are growing at an astonishing rate, and they spend most of their time in the state that facilitates that growth. As we age, sleep duration decreases, but the need never disappears. Even the oldest adults require sleep, though they often struggle to get it. The body never outgrows its dependence on darkness. And it's not just humans. Every animal with a nervous system sleeps in some form. Birds sleep, fish sleep. Even insects have sleep-like states where they become less responsive to stimuli, and their metabolism shifts. There's a tiny worm called C. elegans, just a millimeter long with exactly 302 neurons, and even it has periods of reduced activity that researchers call sleep. If something so simple, so ancient has evolved sleep, it suggests the process is not a luxury, but a necessity written into the very fabric of life. But here's what's remarkable. Despite how universal sleep is, despite how essential it is, we still don't fully understand it. There are competing theories, ongoing debates, mysteries that haven't been solved. We know what happens during sleep. We can measure the cellular processes, the hormonal changes, the neural activity. But the ultimate question, the why, at the deepest level, remains partially unanswered. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe the most important things are the ones that retain some mystery, the ones we can experience without fully explaining. What we do know, what the science makes absolutely clear, is that sleep is not passive. It's not emptiness. It's not wasted time. It's the most active cellular restoration process your body undergoes. It's when your neurons prune and consolidate, when your DNA repairs itself, when your immune cells train and deploy, when your metabolism resets, when your heart slows and your vessels heal, when your muscles grow and your bones strengthen. All of it coordinated, all of it necessary, all of it made possible by the simple act of closing your eyes and letting go. And yet, we live in a world that increasingly devalues this. We celebrate those who sleep less. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. We equate rest with weakness and constant productivity with virtue. We have created technologies that extend the day indefinitely, that keep us tethered to work and entertainment and stimulation at all hours. We have built a civilization that operates 24/7 and expects us to do the same. But biology doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about deadlines or ambitions or the demands of modern life. It has requirements. And when those requirements aren't met, consequences follow, not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, silently. Across years and decades, the systems begin to fail, memory declines, immunity weakens, metabolism breaks, heart disease develops, muscles atrophy. The body denied the rest. It needs begins the long process of breaking down. There's a genetic condition called fatal familial insomnia. It's mercifully rare, affecting only a few families worldwide. People with this condition lose the ability to sleep completely, permanently. It usually begins in middle age. At first, the symptoms are subtle: difficulty falling asleep, restless nights. But it progresses. Within months, sleep becomes impossible. And without sleep, the body begins to fail rapidly. Hallucinations, panic attacks, rapid weight loss despite eating. Within a year or two, death. Not from the insomnia itself, but from the cascading failure of every system that depends on sleep to function. It's a horrifying condition, but it teaches us something important: that sleep is not optional, that you cannot will yourself past the need for it, that no amount of determination or strength or discipline can substitute for the cellular processes that only happen in darkness. The people who suffer from fatal familial insomnia are not weak. Their bodies simply cannot do what every body must do to survive. And while most of us will never face that extreme, we all face a lesser version of it. Every night we shortchange ourselves on sleep, we're conducting a small experiment in deprivation. We're asking ourselves to function without the resources they need. And for a while they do. They compensate. They adapt. They keep you going. But that compensation has a cost that accumulates, a cost that eventually inevitably must be paid. But it doesn't have to be that way, because unlike so many health challenges, unlike cancer or heart disease or neurodegeneration that can strike despite our best efforts, sleep is largely within our control. You can choose to prioritize it. You can create the conditions for it. You can honor the rhythm that your body has been following since before you were born. What would it mean to truly respect sleep? Not as something you do when there's nothing else to do, but as the foundation upon which everything else is built. What would it mean to structure your life around the needs of your cells, rather than constantly overriding them? To see rest not as laziness, but as responsibility. To understand that taking care of yourself while unconscious is how you become capable while conscious. Some people already know this. The athletes who build their training around recovery, the students who sleep before exams instead of cramming, the parents who model healthy sleep habits for their children, the workers who set boundaries, who refuse to sacrifice their health for productivity. These are not people who lack ambition. They're people who understand that sustainable performance requires sustainable practice, that you can't pour from an empty cup, that the work you do while awake is only as good as the restoration you do while asleep. And the beautiful thing is that when you prioritize sleep, when you give your body what it needs, it rewards you. Not just with the absence of disease, though, that's part of it, but with presence, with energy, with clarity, with resilience, with the feeling of being fully alive, fully yourself, fully capable of engaging with the world. Sleep doesn't just prevent you from getting worse. It allows you to get better, to grow, to adapt, to become more than you were. There's a researcher named Alan Rechtschaffen who once said, "If sleep does not serve an absolutely vital function, then it is the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made." Think about that. Hundreds of millions of years of evolution have preserved sleep across every branch of the animal kingdom. It makes us vulnerable to predators. It costs hours of potential activity every day. And yet, it persists. It must persist. Because without it, complex life cannot exist. You are the heir to that evolutionary wisdom. Every night when you sleep, you're participating in a process that's older than humanity, older than mammals, older than anything we would recognize as an ancestor. You're doing what life has always done, alternating between action and rest, between breakdown and repair, between consciousness and the vast mysterious work that happens beneath it. So, when you lie down, when you feel yourself drifting, know that you're not abandoning the world. You're not being unproductive. You're not wasting time. You're giving 37 trillion cells permission to do what they've been waiting all day to do: to clean, to rebuild, to remember, to prepare, to heal. You're participating in the most fundamental act of self-care that exists. You're trusting your body to take care of itself. And it will. It always has. Your cells know how to sleep better than you know how to wake. They've been practicing for billions of years. From the first single-celled organism that learned to sync its metabolism to the cycle of day and night, to the complex conscious being you are now, life has understood that survival requires surrender. That strength comes from acknowledging limitation, that the darkness is not something to fear, but something to welcome. We've walked through the science together. We've seen the mechanisms, the hormones, the cellular processes, the evolutionary logic. But science at its best doesn't just explain, it reveals. It shows us that we are more intricate, more resilient, more beautifully designed than we ever imagined. That the simple act of sleep contains multitudes. That closing your eyes sets in motion a cascade of events so complex, so perfectly orchestrated, that no technology could replicate it. No intervention could replace it. You are right now a miracle of coordination. Trillions of cells working in concert. Systems communicating across vast distances measured in the inches and feet of your own body. Chemical messages being sent, received, interpreted, acted upon. All of it synchronized not by conscious effort, but by the deep intelligence of life itself. An intelligence that knows without being told when it's time to work and when it's time to rest. And now, as we come to the end of this journey, as the words slow and the night deepens, maybe you're feeling what your cells have been trying to tell you all along, that it's time. Time to stop. Time to release. Time to let the repair begin. Not because you're broken, but because you're alive. And the living require rest. There's no homework here, no action items, no need to do anything differently. Just an invitation to notice, to appreciate, to feel grateful for a body that asks so little and gives so much. That works tirelessly and visibly in darkness and in light, to keep you here, to keep you whole, to keep you capable of experiencing this strange, beautiful, temporary existence. Sleep well, friend. Your cells are already dreaming for you. And when you wake, whenever that is, they'll have done what they do every night. They'll have rebuilt you cell by cell into a version of yourself ready to face another day. Not perfect, not invincible, but restored, resilient, ready. Thank you for drifting with me through this quiet exploration, for letting science be told softly, for trusting that knowledge and rest can coexist. If these nights mean something to you, if they bring you peace or curiosity or simply a moment of calm, there will be more. More stories, more science, more whispered truths about the hidden life happening inside you. Until then, rest, Dream gently. Let the darkness do its work. Good night.